Hey guys, it's Jess from Love Jessco on social media, and I am super excited to be sharing another post with you as a member of the Archer and Olive Ambassador team. In today's video, we are going to explore using inks in your journal. And while we're doing that, we are going to create a cover page. It could be used for a nature journal or a reading journal, or honestly, just a monthly cover page, whatever you want to use it for. I'm sure it'll fit the bill, and you can change up the colors as you go to make it fit for whatever you need. Whenever I'm getting started on a project that I'm going to use inks on, I always make sure to add some scrap paper behind the pages I'm working on. This helps to make sure that the rest of my journal is protected and you don't accidentally get ink on another page or on like the tops or outsides of the pages where you don't want it. You really want to keep that design only on this page, and that's what we're going to do. I'm also using a low tack tape here, kind of like a post-it note, but in a tape format, just to block off the seam or kind of like the crease there so that I don't get any ink on the other page. I want to keep that nice and crisp white. But this allows me to block off that side as well, but go right to the edge with my ink blending. The inks that I'm using today are a dye and pigment based ink, and they are water reactive. The type of ink that you use will make a difference in how your final project turns out, so just keep that in mind. All inks are not created equally, and they all have different properties and different things that work for them, but these are the ones I am focusing on today. The small tool I have in my hand is called a mini ink blending tool, and it has a foam blending pad on the bottom that allows you to put the ink into that foam and then apply it to your paper. Now, I usually like to work in a circular motion when I'm applying the ink, both from the ink pad to the pad and from the pad to the paper. I find that it gives less harsh lines for an overall smoother blend. I'm actually going to cover this entire left page with ink. So I started with my lightest color. I have 4 total colors I'm using. You can use as few or as many as you'd like. This seems to be a good amount for me, and the darkest color is really only for just a tiny accent on the edges. So I start with my lightest color, and I'm using that circular blending motion to fill in the page. I do tend to try to come in from the side of the page, not starting in the center, just to prevent any like weird heavier marks or impressions with the ink blending tool. But you can play around with this actually and get kind of a more weathered or vintage sort of look if you do add some imperfections versus having a completely smooth, perfect blend. In general, when I'm doing my ink blending, I do tend to start heavier handed up at the top and then fade to a lighter pressure as I move down the page. Obviously, this is going to depend on the technique you're going for or the final result you're looking for, but this gives sort of an ombre or gradient effect if you do it this way, where you start with more pressure up at the top and then less pressure down at the bottom. The more pressure you apply, the darker or more concentrated or pigmented that ink is going to be on the paper, and the lighter pressure you apply, the lighter or more faded the ink is going to be, because you have a thinner layer versus the thicker layer with more pressure. Now, I do want to mention that I did keep this at regular speed, so this is not sped up at all. I wanted you guys to see how long it takes, so you have a realistic expectation of how much time you might commit to doing a page like this in your journal. And we have officially moved on to our second color. So this is the next darker color of ink, and you can see that it adds a lot more pigment on top. So like I said before, I start with a heavier amount of pressure up at the top. And then as I get towards maybe sort of the middle of the page, I will start lightening that pressure so that you can get that gradient effect, so that the top color currently will blend a little bit better or more smoothly with that color at the bottom. My goal when I'm ink blending is to make sure that I don't have harsh lines, unless that's a specific thing you're going for. I try to make the blends transition from one color to another fairly seamlessly, just so that there is kind of that continuity of the color. It just, I don't know, something about it speaks to my little creative soul. We are moving on to the third color, which is again, darker shade of green. And I'm starting at the top as I was before. So like I mentioned, I like that gradient or ombre sort of effect. I think it looks really pretty. And so I'm adding the darker color up at the top, and then fading that out. Now with the middle color, I kind of went, I don't know, around halfway. With this one, I will only go a even shorter amount than that so that we get that nice blend of colors. So I'll do that nice darker color up at the top, and then add sort of around the sides a little bit. I'll tend to add some color, and that sort of gives a little bit more personality to the ink blend, but this is all personal preference. This is just what I like. You guys can absolutely do whatever you want. To finish off the ink blending on this side, I'm using that fourth color, which is black, and I use this very sparingly just to intensify the darkness around the edge, the top edge, and then the left and right, just on the top part. You don't want to go too crazy with this because you don't want it to just be black. You just want to use it to kind of create more depth of color in your green ink blending. I wanted to take a second and show the back side of this page. We've applied a lot of ink to the opposite side, and there is absolutely no bleed through with this Archer and Olive notebook. With the nice thick pages, there is not even a trace of the ink. Now that does not hold true when you add water. So I wanted to show you kind of what that looks like. I sprayed a little bit of water in my hand and flicked it onto the paper, let it sit for just a second, and then dabbed up the excess water with some dry paper towels. Then when we look at the back side, we'll be able to see that there is a tiny bit of bleed through because we added that water. It's not much. I don't even know if you can see too much of it on the camera here. It's very faint, but there are a couple little spots where it does bleed through. So just be aware if you add water, it can make that ink bleed through just a little. So as I mentioned before, these inks are water reactive, and that is why when I flicked the water on there and then blotted it up with a paper towel, we got a difference in the color. I think it adds kind of a nice sort of mottled, rustic, vintage sort of look to things, but you can skip that totally if you don't want to use water in your journal. To add a little more personality to our ink blending on this side, I grabbed a stencil and I'm just applying the same ink colors with that mini ink blending tool through the stencil. I'm not going like the whole page, only just little parts of it, just to add a little bit of interest and a little more personality, like we said earlier, to the page and just make it a little bit more fun. So I like to kind of try to be random with it. If you have a particular pattern you like, then you can use that. Otherwise, just sort of add a little bit here and there. I'm also using a stamp. This is a red rubber stamp using those same ink pads, and I'm going to apply the ink to the stamp and then just press it in a few different places on the background here or in the notebook that we've created, just to add a little bit of fun as well. This is kind of a script stamp, so it adds kind of more of that vintage sort of romantic aspect to the page over here. I'm random with this, very sporadic. There's no rhyme or reason to what I'm doing. Just kind of follow your heart and put it wherever you feel like it'll fit best. I think it's also worth mentioning that you can use any of these techniques that I've shown so far alone or in combination with the other techniques. So if you'd rather just do the ink blending, you can do that. Or if you just want to add a pop of color with a stencil and some ink, you can do it that way. Or you can just use the stamping. I like to show that you can use them all together for a sort of mixed media vibe here, but you absolutely don't have to. You can pick and choose which ones you like best. This is my absolute favorite part, which is the reveal of the crisp white line. When you remove all of the paper and tape, there's just something so satisfying about that. I did want to really quick mention that I used an acrylic paint spray. This is kind of like a liquid acrylic paint, and I just took the lid off and tapped it over the side on the left there for those darker splatters, and that's how I got that look on the left. I decided to use some collage paper from the most recent spring collection from Archer and Olive. This is from the Enchanted Chapters spring release, and I absolutely love those images. They fit perfectly, I think, with this ink blended background we have on the side here. So I decided to go ahead and use this kind of spooky forest vibe one. I'm creating a mat for it using the ink. This is another technique you can use with an ink pad you already have. You can apply the ink directly to your paper. Now, this is just a sheet of computer paper. It's actually one of those ones I was using to block off the back of the rest of the notebook while I was doing my ink blending. So I just trimmed it down to be slightly larger than the photo that I wanted to use from that collage paper. And now I am applying the ink directly to the paper. I wanted to show a few different ways that you could do this. So I generally just hold it in my hand and apply it that way because I feel like I have the most control over where the ink is going. However, it can make your hands very messy. So if you're not into that, you can put down a scrap sheet of paper or a paper towel like I'm showing here. The only thing is I feel like it doesn't transfer quite as well when you're doing it flat on the table because when you're holding it, you can apply the pressure with your fingers directly to where you want the ink to go, and it kind of helps it get on there a little easier. But as with everything, it's just personal preference. So I'm just swiping that ink pad directly onto the paper, just around the edges. You don't have to color in the whole thing. I'm just doing around the outside so that we have a perfectly color coordinated mat to go under our picture. And then that will match perfectly with our left side. And we don't have to have like a specific color of cardstock or anything like that. We can just use the inks that we already used. The next step is to apply the glue to the back of the photo or collage paper and attach that to the mat that we created. And then we'll do the same thing, applying glue to the back of both of those and then attaching it to the notebook. I like to use a liquid glue. You could use a tape runner or whatever you prefer, just so long as it holds it in your notebook. Now you'll be able to see what I meant earlier about using some of these methods by themselves. I'm adding a little bit of color with the stencil we used before, just applying that ink with the ink blending tool through the stencil, and I'm adding it to sort of bring the two pages together. Now you could absolutely skip this part. There's nothing saying you have to do that, but adding this little bit of stenciling kind of brings a little bit of continuity to it so that the pages look like they belong together. I'm adding a little bit in the top corner, a little bit in the bottom corner, a tiny bit over on the right-hand side there. And then I did go back and grab some letter or alpha stamps from Archer and Olive. I plopped those on an acrylic block, and I'm using one of the darker colors of ink here to apply ink to the stamp, and then we're going to stamp that directly into the journal. Now I'm making a kind of title page almost with this. This is where I kind of meant that you could use it as a cover page, either for a reading journal or a nature journal, but you could definitely use it for a monthly cover page as well. So the sentiment that I'm doing here is let's get lost. And after I finished the stamping, I went in with a coordinating calligraph pen and added the hand-lettered sentiment. And just like that, we are done. I hope this gave you some inspiration for using inks in your notebooks or journals from Archer and Olive. Keep in mind that you don't have to use the exact supplies I use. Feel free to get creative with what you already have in your stash. I think that's one of the best parts of being creative, is really using what you have and making it work for the design that you want to use it for. If you were inspired to create anything from this video, be sure to tag us on social media. You can tag Archer and Olive, and you can tag me as well at LoveJessCo, and I'd love to see what you're up to. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in another one really soon.